Mercedes, it was supposed to be the race of the century. Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen entered Abu Dhabi equal on points after a season-long slugfest that had already seen crashes, penalties, and accusations flying from both sides. For Mercedes, it was simple. Lewis controlled the race, pulling away lap after lap, and with just a few laps remaining, the 8th world title was practically in his pocket. Then, Nicholas Latifi hit the wall. Out came the safety car, and with it, the most controversial decision in modern Formula One history. Michael Masi, the race director, was under enormous pressure. Teams were screaming on the radio, Red Bull demanding the lapped cars be moved, Mercedes begging for the rules to be followed. The rule book said either all lapped cars must be let through or none. Instead, Masi made up a compromise. Only the cars between Hamilton and Verstappen would be allowed to unlap themselves, and the safety car procedure was applied in an unprecedented way, allowing only certain lapped cars through before the restart. It was a decision that broke precedent, contradicted the regulations, and effectively turned a 57-lap strategic battle into a one-lap shootout. Hamilton, on worn hard tires, suddenly found Verstappen looming in his mirrors with fresh softs. On the restart, Max dived down the inside at turn 5. Hamilton fought back, tried to slipstream down the back straight, but it was over. Verstappen crossed the line first. The championship was decided not by months of racing, but by a single manipulated restart. The paddock erupted. Mercedes lodged protests immediately, citing rule breaches. Their arguments were valid. The FIA's own regulations had been ignored, but the stewards brushed them aside. And while Mercedes prepared to appeal further, pressure from the governing body pushed them to back down for the good of the sport. The outrage among fans was deafening. Hamilton fans called it robbery. Verstappen fans called it karma. Either way, trust in F1's governance collapsed. Within weeks, Masi was quietly removed from his role. The FIA rewrote the safety car rules, essentially admitting the 2021 ending was handled incorrectly. But for Mercedes, it didn't matter. Lewis had been denied his 8th title in a way that felt political rather than sporting. To this day, Abu Dhabi 2021 is remembered less as a race and more as Formula One's greatest credibility crisis. The night where the rulebook was bent, a legacy was stolen, and the sport's integrity was questioned on a global scale. Alpine, Renault. If the pink Mercedes blurred the line between fair play and copying, crashgate obliterated it. Singapore 2008 was supposed to be a showcase, Formula One's first ever night race, glittering lights against the city skyline. Instead, it became one of the darkest scandals in sporting history. Renault's Fernando Alonso was stuck down the grid after a poor qualifying. His teammate, Nelson Piquet Jr., was struggling in obscurity. But on lap 14, Piquet suddenly spun his car into the wall at turn 17. The crash brought out the safety car, shuffling the order completely. By sheer coincidence, Alonso had just pitted 2 laps earlier. With rivals forced to pit under the safety car, Alonso vaulted up the order and eventually won the race. At the time, it looked like luck. In reality, it was treachery. A year later, Piquet Jr., bitter after being dropped by Renault, spilled everything. He had been ordered to crash by team bosses Flavio Briatore and Pat Simons to engineer Alonso's victory. The revelation shook Formula One to its core. This wasn't just team orders or financial bending. This was a deliberate crash, a conspiracy that put lives at risk, all to manipulate the outcome of a race. The FIA launched a full-blown investigation. The evidence was damning. Piquet's telemetry showed no attempt to correct the spin. Meetings revealed coded discussions between him and management. Briatore and Simons were banned from the sport, though appeals later softened the penalties. Renault itself received a suspended ban, escaping outright exclusion only because the scandal would have devastated F1's image if a major manufacturer was banned mid-season. The backlash was enormous. Alonso's reputation was questioned by some, though the FIA found no evidence he had any involvement. Briatore's flamboyant career ended in disgrace, and for fans, Singapore 2008 became shorthand for betrayal. Crashgate wasn't just cheating. It was sabotage disguised as strategy. Alpine's legacy is still haunted by it. Proof that sometimes the ugliest scandals aren't born from greed, but from the willingness to risk everything, even human safety, for a win. McLaren, if Ferrari's scandal was about power on track, McLaren's was about betrayal off it. The year was 2007, and McLaren had one of the most explosive driver lineups in history. Reigning double champion Fernando Alonso and rookie sensation Lewis Hamilton. On track, the two were tearing each other apart. Off track, the team was about to implode in one of the most damaging controversies F1 has ever seen. It started quietly. A 780-page technical dossier from Ferrari somehow ended up in the hands of McLaren's chief designer, Mike Coughlin. Inside were detailed drawings, car setups, and secrets of Ferrari's 2007 machine. When Ferrari discovered the leak, the scandal exploded. The Italian team accused McLaren of industrial espionage. The FIA launched a full-scale investigation, and suddenly, the season wasn't just about Hamilton versus Alonso. It was about the survival of McLaren's reputation. The details were shocking. Emails between McLaren engineers revealed they had discussed Ferrari's brake balance, weight distribution, and pit strategy. Coughlin's wife had even been caught photocopying the documents at a local print shop. Ron Dennis, McLaren's proud team principal, swore he knew nothing. Alonso, furious at being treated as second fiddle to Hamilton, clashed with management and hinted at revealing information during the dispute. The soap opera turned toxic. When the FIA's verdict came down, it was unprecedented. McLaren was fined $100 million, the largest fine in sporting history, and stripped of all Constructors' Championship points for 2007. Hamilton and Alonso kept their driver's points, but the team's reputation was shredded. For rivals, it was confirmation that McLaren had cheated. For fans, it was a betrayal of the sport's spirit. The fallout was catastrophic. Alonso fled back to Renault after just one season. Hamilton carried the scars into his career, forever linked with the scandal that marred his rookie year. Ron Dennis stepped down in disgrace, his once proud empire tainted, and for years after, spygate remained shorthand for the darkest kind of paddock politics, where engineers and insiders weren't just fighting on the track, but stealing behind closed doors. McLaren's 2007 team had the talent to be legendary. Instead, they're remembered for one of the biggest scandals F1 has ever seen, a controversy so severe it rewrote the limits of punishment and forever branded the team with the stain of Ferrari's stolen secrets. Williams' no controversy in Williams' history, or perhaps in all of Formula One, looms larger than Imola 1994. That weekend is etched into motorsport's darkest pages. Roland Ratzenberger died in qualifying, and on Sunday, Ayrton Senna, the greatest driver of his generation, lost his life in a Williams at Tamburello Corner. The crash was horrifying. Senna's car speared off at 190 miles per hour, went straight into the concrete wall, and struck with terrifying force. The world watched in shock as medical crews tried desperately to save him, but by evening, Senna was gone. For Williams, the tragedy instantly became controversy. Investigations considered a possible steering column failure, a part that had been modified for Senna's comfort. But the exact cause of the crash was never conclusively proven. The team denied negligence, but Italian prosecutors didn't agree. Frank Williams, Patrick Head, and other senior staff were dragged into court on manslaughter charges. The trial stretched on for over a decade, appeals and retrials painting Williams not as a victim of fate, but as a defendant accused of building a flawed car that killed a hero. The team always maintained innocence. In the end, legal systems failed to deliver closure. Some charges were dropped due to statute of limitations, others overturned, but the damage to Williams' image was permanent. Fans, grieving Senna, demanded answers. Rumors and theories swirled. Was it steering? Was it ride height? Was it just bad luck? To this day, there is no consensus, only haunting footage of Senna's final lap. For Williams, it was the darkest chapter in their history, a weekend meant to showcase engineering. Brilliance became synonymous with death, grief, and courtroom battles. Even their later championships couldn't erase the stain. Imola 1994 wasn't just a tragedy, it was a controversy that still divides the sport. A reminder that behind every innovation lies a risk, and sometimes the price of speed is unbearably high. Ferrari in the early 2000s was untouchable. Michael Schumacher, backed by the iron grip of Jean Todt and Ross Brawn, dominated Formula One with precision and power. But that dominance came at a cost, and nothing symbolized it more than Austria 2002, the day Ferrari's ruthlessness collided with sporting integrity in front of millions. Rubens Barrichello, Schumacher's loyal number 2, had driven the race of his life. Lap after lap, he fended off Michael. The Brazilian, often treated as a support act, was finally on course to claim a deserved victory. But with a few laps to go, Ferrari's radio message came in, cold, calculated, and damning. Rubens let Michael pass for the championship. It wasn't subtle. The cameras caught Barrichello slowing almost to a crawl on the final straight, allowing Schumacher to take the win by a fraction of a second. The podium ceremony turned into a farce. The Austrian crowd booed loudly. Even Schumacher, visibly uncomfortable, tried to pull Barrichello onto the top step of the podium in a clumsy attempt at damage control, but the damage was already done. Fans felt insulted. Team orders weren't new, but this was blatant, shameless, and unnecessary. Schumacher was already cruising toward another title. He didn't need those extra points. Barrichello was humiliated, reduced to a pawn in Ferrari's championship obsession. Even the FIA couldn't ignore the outrage. They fined Ferrari $1 million for how the podium ceremony was handled, and later brought in a ban on team orders, though the rule would later return in softer form. Austria 2002 became Ferrari's darkest moment of dominance. The team that built the most successful driver car combination in history also exposed the ugly truth. Winning wasn't enough. They demanded total control. For Barrichello, it cemented his legacy as Schumacher's sacrificial teammate. For Ferrari, it was a scandal that stained an era of greatness with the image of manipulation. And for fans, it was proof that sometimes the biggest rival wasn't another team. It was the politics inside the Red Garage. Red Bull. If Abu Dhabi 2021 destroyed trust in race direction, then Red Bull's 2022 scandal tore into the financial integrity of Formula One. The cost cap, introduced in 2021, was meant to level the playing field. Every team had a hard ceiling on spending, $145 million, with strict penalties for overspending. But when the FIA released its audit in late 2022, the headlines hit like a bomb. Red Bull had breached the cost cap in their championship-winning 2021 season. The figure wasn't enormous, around $2 million, later attributed partly to misreporting, catering costs, and HR miscalculations. But the number didn't matter. The principle did. In a sport where tenths of a second are worth millions, even a small overspend could mean upgraded parts, extra wind tunnel hours, or simulator work that rivals couldn't afford. Mercedes and Ferrari pounced, calling the breach a fundamental betrayal of the cap system. Fans erupted on social media, many questioning the legitimacy of Red Bull's success. First because of Abu Dhabi, then because of the overspend the FIA had promised strict enforcement, even hinting that titles could be stripped for serious breaches. But when the punishment came, it felt toothless. Red Bull was fined $7 million, pocket change for a drinks-backed powerhouse, and docked 10% of their aerodynamic testing time for 2023. Christian Horner stood defiant, calling the penalty draconian, while rivals laughed at the idea that losing some wind tunnel hours would undo the advantage of a championship-winning operation. The controversy wasn't just about money, it was about perception. Formula One had sold the cost cap as its version of financial fair play, a way to stop mega teams from crushing the field. And yet, the very first high-profile breach came from the team that had just dominated the season. To fans, it looked like Red Bull got away with a slap on the wrist. To rivals, it was proof that F1's financial policing wasn't strong enough. The fallout lingered into 2023 and beyond. Every Verstappen victory was followed by sarcastic chants of catering upgrade. Even today, the debate still rages. Did Red Bull's overspend contribute to their success? Did the FIA bend to political pressure, again by avoiding harsher punishment? Whatever the answer, the scandal became Red Bull's biggest stain. Not a crash, not a team order, but the idea that their dynasty was built, even slightly, on breaking the rules. Aston Martin. When Racing Point rolled out their 2020 car, jaws dropped across the paddock. It looked identical to the championship-winning Mercedes W10 from 2019. Same nose, same side pods, same sculpted aero philosophy. The nickname came instantly, the Pink Mercedes. At first, people laughed, a midfield team daring to copy the might of Mercedes. But laughter turned to fury once the car started flying. Sergio Perez and Lance Stroll suddenly had a car that could challenge for podiums. A team once fighting for scraps was now mixing it with Red Bull and Ferrari. Rival teams cried foul. Copying designs was nothing new, but the level of similarity was uncanny. Renault lodged a formal protest after the Styrian Grand Prix, targeting the brake ducts. Under the rules, those were listed parts, meaning each team had to design them themselves. Yet Racing Point's ducts were near carbon copies of Mercedes. The FIA's investigation dragged on for weeks, tension boiling over in press conferences. Racing Point argued they had used photographs and legal data data from Mercedes. Their boss, Ottmar Safnauer, mocked the rivals, saying, "You couldn't unsee good design." But the truth was clear. Mercedes and Racing Point had a deeper relationship than most admitted. After all, Mercedes supplied engines, gearboxes, and shared technical ties. Was it collaboration or collusion? The verdict came before Silverstone. Racing Point was docked 15 championship points and fined €400,000. Yet, and here was the scandal, they were allowed to keep racing the car for the rest of the season. Rivals exploded. Cyril Abiteboul at Renault fumed. Zach Brown at McLaren called it cheating with permission. The points penalty didn't undo the advantage. Racing Point still won a race later that year with Perez and Sakir. For fans, it was proof of F1's double standards. Smaller teams were crucified for smaller breaches, yet Racing Point, conveniently tied to Mercedes, got a slap on the wrist. The pink Mercedes controversy became Aston Martin's defining scandal, raising an uncomfortable question. If copying is legal enough to win, then where does innovation end and plagiarism begin? Haas for years. Haas was the underdog team of Formula One. Low budget, few results, but always fighting to stay alive. Then came 2021, and with it, a lifeline. Uralkali, the Russian fertilizer giant, came on board as title sponsor. With the money came a driver, Nikita Mazepin, son of Uralkali's billionaire owner Dmitry Mazepin. It looked like a marriage of convenience, but by 2022, it had spiraled into Haas' most infamous controversy. Nikita Mazepin arrived in F1 with a reputation already in tatters, videos of inappropriate behavior, allegations of aggression off track, and a driving style that earned him the nickname Mazepin. Fans hated him before he even started. The only reason he was in the seat was money. But Haas needed the cash, and Uralkali's green and white branding was plastered across the car. Then the world changed. In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Sanctions hit Russian companies, and suddenly having a Russian sponsor and a Russian driver became toxic. Pressure mounted instantly. Fans, politicians, and even other teams demanded Haas cut ties. On the final day of preseason testing, Haas stripped all Uralkali branding from their car, running plain white livery. Within a week, both the sponsorship and Mazepin were gone. The fallout was brutal. Dmitry Mazepin raged, threatening lawsuits and accusing Haas of breaking contracts. Nikita claimed he was the victim of cancel culture, insisting he had nothing to do with politics. But the reality was simple. Haas couldn't afford to be the team seen as bankrolled by Russia in the middle of a war. For Haas, it was both a moral decision and a financial disaster. They lost their biggest sponsor overnight. Yet oddly, it also freed them. They signed Kevin Magnussen back at the last minute, and in Bahrain, he delivered a miracle P5 finish. The Mazepin era ended as quickly as it began, remembered not for results, but as a cautionary tale of what happens when a small team sells its seat to money and global politics tears the deal apart. Toro Rosso. For most midfield outfits, the fight is survival. But in 2007, Toro Rosso, now rebranded as RB, found itself at the center of a political storm that had nothing to do with racing wheel-to-wheel. The issue? The definition of a constructor. Toro Rosso's cars that season bore an uncomfortable resemblance to their sister team, Red Bull Racing. Same chassis philosophy, same design cues. Rival teams accused Toro Rosso of fielding a customer car, essentially running Red Bull-built machinery under a different name. That went against the core of F1's identity, where each team was supposed to build its own car. The complaints were loudest from Williams and Spiker, who were fighting for scraps of points at the back of the grid. For them, Toro Rosso having access to Adrian Newey's design ideas from Red Bull was a death sentence. They filed official protests, arguing that sharing designs violated the Concord Agreement. The FIA's stance was murky. Technically, Red Bull owned both teams, but regulations at the time weren't clear enough to outright forbid sharing intellectual property. Instead, the case devolved into a courtroom mess. Lawyers debated definitions of constructor. While on track, the controversy overshadowed Toro Rosso's racing. The issue simmered for years, never truly resolved, until F1's rules were rewritten to clarify what counted as listed parts and what couldn't be shared. By then, Toro Rosso had already earned the reputation of being Red Bull's junior team in more than name. For fans, the 2007 row confirmed what they suspected. Toro Rosso existed not just to race, but to serve as Red Bull's satellite. And in that year, they may have pushed the meaning of independent team beyond breaking point. Sauber most scandals in Formula One involve money, politics, or accidents. Sauber's biggest one involved lawyers. Heading into the 2015 Australian Grand Prix, the team had a full-blown driver crisis. They had signed too many contracts, and one driver wasn't about to back down. The lineup was supposed to be Felipe Nasr and Marcus Ericsson, but Dutch driver Guido van der Garde had a valid contract too. He had been promised a seat for 2015, and when Sauber tried to push him aside, he took them to court and won. The scene in Melbourne was surreal. On Thursday, court rulings declared van der Garde the rightful driver. By Friday, Nasr and Ericsson were still preparing to race. The paddock buzzed with chaos. Sauber argued they couldn't let van der Garde drive because he didn't have the right seat fit or super license clearance. Van der Garde accused them of breach of contract. Lawyers circled, journalists swarmed, and fans watched in disbelief as a backmarker team turned into a legal circus. On race day, van der Garde didn't drive. Instead, a last-minute settlement was reached. Sauber paid him off. Millions in compensation, though the exact figure never confirmed. But the embarrassment stuck. The team looked incompetent, unable to manage basic contracts. Team principal Monisha Kaltenborn faced heavy criticism for mishandling the situation. For Sauber, it wasn't about lost points. They weren't fighting for wins anyway. It was about credibility. When your biggest headlines come from a courtroom instead of a racetrack, the damage lasts. To this day, 2015 Melbourne is remembered less for the racing and more for Sauber's humiliating driver drama. Proof that in Formula One, chaos doesn't always start with a crash.